Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lawcast. Joining me, as always, is the one and only Cewsh. How's it going, man?
I feel like the one and only greatest because this is the greatest night in the history of our sport.
Thank you, Mr. Shivani. So this week, in honor of The Undertaker's apparent retirement, we decided to take a look back at the show where he made his WWF debut, and that was Survivor Series 1990, which in my view was kind of a turning point in the company's history and a really interesting time period to reflect on. What springs to mind when you think about this era?
Well, this is a little bit before, I'm not going to bring up my story of how I started watching wrestling for the fourth podcast in a row, but this is a little bit before I started watching, so I know all of the people from this era, but I got them when it was a little further into the transition towards the new generation kind of stuff. Warrior had I only ever saw him in VHS tape because he had already come and gone. But what I mostly remember from this era is I remember the WWE storyline between Sergeant Slaughter and Hulk Hogan being news. I remember seeing news stories about it on TV and how people didn't approve of it. Now, it was a big deal and it wasn't okay because I lived in a military town. I lived in Norfolk, Virginia at the time. So it was a big deal.
Yeah, that Slaughter storyline, we'll get into that a little bit. I don't want to go too deep into it because I think we'll cover it more in depth someday when we do Wrestlemania 7, but this is kind of the early stages of it, and I'm interested to get into that a little bit.
For sure.
So here at the end of 1990, it feels like in retrospect when we look back on it, WrestleMania 6 was probably the end of the 1980s wrestling boom. They did a great house in the Sky Dome, sold out the Sky Dome in Toronto, but it was kind of disappointing pay-per-view number, only 550,000 buys, which was down 200,000 buys from WrestleMania 5. And then SummerSlam was down over 100,000 buys from the previous year. So by this point, it's kind of clear their business is softening. They had passed the torch to Warrior at WrestleMania. They had him beat Hogan, put the title on him, but I think by this point, towards the end of 1990, it was kind of becoming clear that he was not the guy who was going to lead them into the future. What do you think of Warrior as the top guy, as the champion? Why do you think it didn't really work out?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it didn't work out. I mean, he couldn't really work. He definitely had the people. Even here, and this is several months into them, for most people consider it that he kind of buried himself already by this point, but the fans still love him. But
that never changed. He never stopped getting big reactions.
Yeah, but it's not an act that really goes anywhere. There's nothing to really work with. It was impossible to get a good match out of him. He couldn't really talk. He wasn't really bringing people into the seats in the same way. He just wasn't Hogan. And but he was close enough to the Hogan package that he looked worse by comparison. Either you have to have something better or you have to have something different. And Warrior wasn't different or better. So it just really didn't work. And the fans weren't sick of Hogan yet. So they really didn't like having somebody other than Hogan.
Do you think there's a problem that he was too invulnerable? Hogan always won, but Hogan always got the crap beaten out of him and then would make his comeback. And Hogan had a lot of vulnerability and would really sell, and Warrior didn't really do that. Warrior just kind of clotheslined people and splashed them and beat them, it seemed.
Well, I think the same story has been told throughout wrestling history, right? An invulnerable face gets over very quickly and burns really hot. But when it's over, it's over. You can just look at the comparison between Steve Austin and Goldberg. It's along the same lines. Having vulnerability might make it take longer for you to get to the top, but you stay there longer. Whereas once the dominant babyface loses, where the hell do you go with it?
Yeah, no, definitely. But I also wonder I don't know if anybody really could have followed the Hogan act. And I also think it's worth pointing out that Hogan's not gone. Hogan was headlining WrestleMania 6 with Warrior. Hogan was in, maybe the biggest match at SummerSlam 90 was Hogan versus Earthquake, more so than Rude versus Warrior for the title. And Hogan wasn't really drawing in this era either. So I think they were just sort of they were kind of past the peak. And I think it's worth noting that this is right about the time the U.S. economy starts to turn south. And it's probably not a coincidence that WWF's business kind of went downhill as the economy went downhill. And we kind of saw the same thing in the early 2000s, that right around the same time that recession started, their business also declined. So I feel like that never really gets pointed out, but their rise in the 80s and their second kind of really huge boom in the late 90s both coincided with, good economic times, low unemployment, rising wages. And then in both cases in the early 90s and 2000s, we had the economy turned south and their business went along with it. This is, I guess, I don't know if the steroid controversy is,
I think it was
heated up, but it's, I don't remember exactly when Zahorian gets indicted, but I don't it's not long after this.
Yeah, and so it's just a whole lot of factors that all kind of conspire at the same time to bring it down. I don't think that any one man could have followed it. I don't think that even Peak Hogan could have followed this under these circumstances. I think this was just eventually after a wrestling boom, it falls off, and then you got to do whatever you can to pick up the pieces afterwards.
Yeah, and so in an attempt to kind of heat things up again, they brought Sergeant Slaughter back from the AWA. He had been gone from the WWF for a long time at this point. He left before WrestleMania 1, and they bring him back as a heel, an anti-American heel, and then they go one step further and they make him an Iraqi sympathizer, which is one of the more controversial angles of all time, and I think one of kind of the worst creative decisions they ever made.
Yeah, I think you can definitely defend it as a creative decision. I can see where they came from with it, especially like there's a million different times that storylines like this have worked, but it was just the wrong time and it was too sensitive and wasn't good. And it must be mentioned that Slaughter had been like a G.I. Joe, like in that time that he had been gone. It's not like he had been a name who was just out of the public eye. People knew who Sergeant Slaughter was. But this was just the wrong way and the wrong time, and it just didn't work.
Yeah. It's an interesting combination of, at the time, I feel like Americans were both very kind of rah-rah, like, go USA, we're going to go kick Iraq's ass, but also kind of fearful because the last couple times America had gotten into a military conflict in Vietnam and Korea, we had kind of not come out on the winning end of those. Korea ended in a stalemate and Vietnam an outright defeat. So there's a lot of anxiety at this point. And I've always thought that the WWF was incredibly lucky that the Gulf War turned out to be a really quick victory for the United States, because it would have been a real disaster if it had turned into another Vietnam and we'd had hundreds of Americans being killed every week and they're promoting an anti-American pro-Iraqi villain on their TV. I think they would have probably had to call the storyline off if that had happened.
Yeah, unless you think that this is just WrestleMania that we're talking about. Here on the show, two different baby faces actively cut promos on Saddam Hussein. Like,
yep.
Just actively like, hey, Saddam, I'm going to come kick your ass. Like, What? What are you... Can you imagine if in 2001, like JBL had come out and been like, all right, I'm going to kick your ass, Undertaker. And by the way, I'm coming for you next, Osama bin Laden. Like, it's insane.
They didn't directly go to it, but they did do Muhammad Hassan. So they sort of learned their lesson, but not entirely.
Right.
Instead, the villains were more ineffectual because instead it was French guys in 2003.
That's right, it was.
Yeah. So the one thing they did differently this year for Survivor Series that I thought was really interesting is they added in the grand finale match, which was where all of the survivors of the previous Survivor Series matches would face off in a final match. So this is an attempt to kind of add more to Survivor Series. I remember as a kid when I first heard about Survivor Series, I was kind of confused when it was just like, oh no, it's just a bunch of tag matches. It's not like the winners don't get anything. There's no tournament or anything. Mm-hmm. It always struck me as odd. So this time they sort of tried to give it more, but there's still no stakes. The winners of the grand finale match still don't get anything. So what do you think this idea was? I don't feel like it added a ton to the show. I think you got to have some stakes if you're going to draw people in for these matches.
Well, there are a couple of things to that, because first, it really would have helped if they had explained the concept of the match really at all.
Well, but they couldn't do it because they can't say it's going to be the heel team against the face team.
Exactly.
Which is what it is, but they can't say it that way. So throughout the show, they're like, oh, well, you've got one guy on the one, you've just got Santana on the one team, and he's up against all the Visionaries. And it's like, well, why? I mean, we know why, but they can't explain it that way.
Right. I mean, I think you have something here if you kind of twist the concept a little. Like maybe everyone who survives is in a battle royal for the title at the end or something like that.
That's what I was thinking. That, yeah, you put them in that would be like the WCW Battle Bowl, the battle royal at the end of the night.
Right.
And I
mean, it's a little close to the Rumble. I don't know if they want to do that.
That probably would be why they wouldn't do it. But yeah, it would make sense to me if you did like a match at the end with all the survivors and the winner got a title shot or something, or the winner got the number 30 spot in the Royal Rumble or something like that.
Right. But I mean, what that winds up creating here is not only is it a bit of a mess where the show feels over after all the tag matches are done, and then it's like, oh, hey, but there's still another match later on, because they don't really do a good job of explaining that there is another match later on. They barely even reference it. So even when people are like winning the Survivor Series matches, they're not like, oh, hey, he's going on to the big match later tonight. Like, they barely acknowledge it.
Yeah, it's a concept that I don't think really came together, and that's probably why they never did it again after this.
Yeah, I do like the idea of there being something after, though, that kind of binds all the matches together. And that's why I think that the only time that Survivor Series has really worked since the early days is when they started doing the Raw versus SmackDown one, because at least something's on the line, you know?
Yeah, or the Authority versus the Team Cena was a really good one where if Cena's guys lost, they all got fired, and if the Authority lost, Triple H and Stephanie were out of power forever or 4
And that's
weeks.
a great example. Yeah, because like when you put stakes on the line like that, all of a sudden Dolph Ziggler's the last one standing, and the fans are going nuts for it because something's on the line.
Yeah. And in these days, just seeing top guys wrestle each other was enough of a draw, but by next year, I think they had already realized they needed to start doing things out a little bigger. So the year after this was the first time you had a world title match and singles matches on the show. And from then on, I don't think they ever did another one that was all team matches. After that, they always had a title match or some singles matches.
I mean, I do love how they do it with the teams here, because there's nothing I love more than like strange bedfellows in wrestling, like weird friendships that crop up and then they just keep getting used. So seeing like, all right, Hulk Hogan's got to pick 3 buddies to win this match for him. What kind of weirdos does he go back into the locker room and find? That's always going to be fun.
Yeah, you can get weeks of good TV out of like having the guys actually recruit their teams. I always enjoy when they do it that way. So the other thing there was buzz for before the show was the egg. And I kind of looked up some news from the time, and this really was a big thing. People were really like curious about what was going to come out of this egg. They'd been building it up for weeks and weeks, and people thought it was going to be like a big new star was going to hatch out of the egg.
Well, I mean, you got to mention the number one rumor at the time, something that people genuinely to this day still believe was the original plan, even though there's no indication it was. People really thought Ric Flair was coming out of that egg.
Yeah. And I mean, Flair was on the outs in WCW, and he's out of WCW about 6 months after this. And Flair coming out of the egg probably would have worked just because it's Ric Flair, and it's going to be cool when he shows up. But they had something different in mind. I don't think there's any indication that this was going to be Flair. He was still under contract with WCW at this point.
And that's a really random way to debut Ric goddamn Flair, is to have him in an egg.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where. I don't know what the basis for that was, other than people kind of knew Flair was unhappy and that he was probably coming into the WWF soon. So I guess we can kind of get into the show. I think we can sort of go over the storylines as we go along. And really, as with a lot of Survivor Series, this was kind of just in the middle where they had mostly wrapped up the big storylines from the summer, but they hadn't really started to push towards WrestleMania. So there's not anything too huge storyline-wise. So first match on the show was a dark match. Shane Douglas beat Buddy Rose, and I feel like that's only notable because I didn't remember that Shane Douglas was in the WWF at this point, and I don't think he was for very long.
Yeah, I think he wrestles on like 2 consecutive dark matches against the same guy, and then he just like disappears for 5 years. Like it's very
he goes to WCW and he rides skateboards with Johnny Ace.
Dynamic dudes.
Yeah. You can sort of understand how Shane Douglas became such a bitter prick after all that.
Oh yeah.
So starting the TV card, the opening match was the Warriors against the Perfect Team. The Warriors consisting of the Ultimate Warrior, the Legion of Doom, and the Texas Tornado, and the Perfect Team being Mr. Perfect and all 3 members of Demolition. So this comes after Vince McMahon opens the show with his very best gravelly voice where he goes over who all the teams are and the matches. And I loved the jazzy saxophone music they had going in the background. So catchy.
So good.
These Vince openings are always great. The voice is so beyond parody.
Oh my God, yes. In fact, I know it's beyond parody, but I got to do it anyway because I've done it on every show thus far. It's the Survivor Series, the epitome of tag team competition. Oh my God, like I need like a lozenge after doing that. I don't know how he does it for 3 hours.
Yeah. Well, he's not on commentary for this one. It's Gorilla Monsoon and Roddy Piper, who I remember doing a little bit of commentary, but this feels like one of the only pay-per-views that he ever called.
Which is a shame because honestly, while at some points he's just going so much far off on tangents that it doesn't make sense, I loved his commentary.
Yeah, he was pretty good, I thought. I liked both him and Savage. Both two guys with a lot of personality and distinctive voices. And he had done commentary before, although it was in Georgia Championship Wrestling in the early 80s. But he had some experience. I think if he had stuck with this, he would have been really good.
Yeah. Oh, man. And the key is that he's fixated so much on what's going on in the ring and like selling the kayfabe aspect of it. Like he's letting Gorilla call the matches and everything he says is just like gets you further involved in what's going on. Like that's exactly what color is.
Yeah. No,
and like he's
a guy with a ton of credibility. So that's what you need in a color guy, not, scrubs like David Otunga and Byron Saxton.
Exactly. Though if you do watch this show, please mark down all the times that Roddy Piper refers to food. And while comparing somebody to something like, what a ham hock. Oh, holy guacamole.
Well, it's Thanksgiving.
Who has ham hocks and guacamole on Thanksgiving?
I don't know. Sounds kind of good. So first we get a promo from the Warriors. I love the group promos. This is one of my favorite parts of Survivor Series is having all the guys standing together back there. The Warriors are entertaining because they all yell. It's the Ultimate Warrior, it's the Road Warriors, and it's Kerry Von Erich. So they are all shouting at you. I also like the way their name works out, that it's the Ultimate Warrior, the Road Warriors, and Kerry Von Erich, who in World Class was billed as the modern-day Warrior. But because Warrior's a dick, did you notice that on the back of his tights it said, the only Warrior?
Yep, I sure did.
I'm really surprised Hawk and Animal didn't smack him for that.
Oh my goodness. And they even call him the Warrior when he comes out. It's just like, all right, buddy.
Yeah. So storyline wise, Texas Tornado's the Intercontinental Champion. He beat Perfect for the belt at SummerSlam. Perfect and Warrior had feuded, I think back in the early summer before Warrior moved on to Rick Rude. And the Road Warriors had been feuding with Demolition, and Warrior had gotten involved in that, and they'd had a 6-man tag match on Saturday night's main event. Actually, one note is that Rick Rude's not on the show at all because he's left the company. I think he was unhappy with his pay for SummerSlam and ended up taking off and leaving for WCW. But he wasn't going to be in this match anyway. He was, I can't remember which team he was on, but he was Haku subbed in for him. It might have been DiBiase's team.
Yeah. I think it was. I don't even. It's the last one, whatever that one was.
Yeah. So this match, because it's a Survivor Series match, there's going to be quick eliminations. With 6 matches on this card, they just didn't have the time to give every match 25 minutes like it kind of needs to do the eliminations properly. But Warrior takes out Axe in 3 minutes with his Warrior Splash. Hawk tags in and ends up getting worked over. And then we get a big brawl that leads to the remaining 2 members of Demolition and both Road Warriors being disqualified. So that takes out Smash, Crush, Hawk, and Animal, leaving us down to just Perfect against Warrior and Tornado. Interesting how they set up the heel in the disadvantage situation there.
Yeah, that is weird. And it's actually, the entire tenor of the match is kind of weird because it's mostly the only person here who is selling at all is Perfect. So he just gets his ass kicked for like the first half of the match. He maybe gets in like 3 offensive moves the whole time.
Yeah, well, nobody else in this match ever sells anything. I mean, Kerry Von Erich is kind of a normal wrestler, but the other guys, all their gimmicks are that they're invulnerable.
Yeah, so it's not a very fun or enlightening match to watch, that's for certain. But yeah, it was very weird that way.
So Warrior, or Perfect takes out Tornado with the Perfect Plex, and it's down to Warrior versus Perfect. Perfect hits him with the Perfect Plex. Warrior, of course, kicks out. He Warriors up and hits the Warrior Splash to pin Perfect. Thought it was okay. Not great, not bad.
No, it wasn't very good. God knows that if Perfect hadn't been in there, how shit it would have been, because he was a genius at selling. And he's doing stuff in there that, like, I'm just, like, marking out for, just even though it's not a particularly important match. Like, he's, like, taking bumps but not hitting the ground. Like, he'll, like, take a clothesline with a full back bump, but somehow he'll still be on his feet. Like, he takes it almost like Neo dodging bullets in the Matrix and comes back up to take another one. Like, I've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, Kurt Hennig before his back went out on him was probably the best bumper in wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely. And can we just, I don't know when we're ever going to talk about this again. So can we just talk about how crappy Demolition looks? Like, I understand.
They were pretty old by this point.
I understand that they were a big deal at the time. And this is obviously before my wrestling watching time, so I don't really get the appeal. But they're wearing this horrible looking half-assed costume bondage gear. And they're all flabby and out of shape.
The masks always looked bad to me. Well, they were Vince trying to create his own version of the Road Warriors, but now he had the actual Road Warriors. But yeah, for some reason, their feud never really, climaxes. They never have like a big blow-off match for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good. And when you put them next to the real Road Warriors, I mean, it couldn't be more obvious that they are not the Road Warriors.
Yeah. Hawk and Animal are both, just absolutely built like brick shit houses. And Demolition, they're big guys, but yeah, they're all kind of puffy and flabby at this point. So the next match is the $1 Million Team of Ted DiBiase and Rhythm and Blues, the Honky Tonk Man, and Greg Valentine, and their mystery partner against the Dream Team, Dusty Rhodes, Coco Beware, and the Hart Foundation. First thing I noticed was the pop for Dusty here was tremendous. And he was, his run with the WWF is kind of controversial. I think the central question is whether or not they were kind of trying to bury him by giving him the polka dots and making him the common man and having him, fix clogged toilets and stuff in his debut video packages. But, regardless of whether or not they were trying to bury him, it didn't work. He becomes one of the most beloved faces in the company for this run.
Yeah, and it always impresses me. Like, I realize that there have been many times in Dusty Rhodes' career where he was in pretty good shape, honestly. He looks horrible here. And yet he's
so fat here.
But he moves as well as anybody in the match. Yeah. Like, it's incredible.
And this is towards the end of him being a full-time wrestler. I don't feel like when he went back to WCW after this, he was ever really a full-time guy again. But yeah, he still had the magic at this point, even though he looked like he weighed about 350 pounds.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, the fans love him. Everything's working. he doesn't really get to do much here, but because somehow, like, despite the fact that all these other stars are in this is Bret Hart's match.
Yeah, Bret's great. But what this match really did to me was this was an incredible introduction for The Undertaker. So he's announced as the mystery partner for DiBiase's team. He's led to the ring by Brother Love, not Paul Bearer. Paul Bearer wouldn't become his manager for a few months after this. It was initially Brother Love until they decided that it was too much for Bruce Pritchard to both be working behind the scenes and be managing such a big character. So they took him off and replaced him with Percy Pringle, who had previously managed The Undertaker when he was in World Class. So at this point, Taker is 6 years into the business. I think he had been around longer than a lot of people realize. He made his debut in 1984 down in World Class as a jobber, Texas Red under a mask. His first match was actually against Bruiser Brody, and you can find that on YouTube if you want. He ended up in Memphis. He got a push in Memphis as the Punisher, won the Southern Heavyweight Championship from Jerry Lawler, and then he went into WCW as Mean Mark Callis. And he got a little bit of a push, teaming with Sid Vicious in the Skyscrapers, and then a bit of a singles run. But WCW didn't really get what they had in him. I don't understand how, when they have a guy who's 6'8" and can walk across the top rope, that they didn't see that as big money. But they just didn't really get it, and they didn't push him, and he ended up deciding to jump ship to the WWF. And they happened to have one of the best gimmicks of all time waiting for him.
Which certainly didn't seem like one when it was on the drawing room table, I guarantee you that. But somehow, like, even right here, even though he's wearing like a big goofy tie, even though he's got like weird eyeshadow on and his costume's like super cartoony, it's already there. Everything that would go on to become synonymous with the character, like somehow it's like already there this first time. When he
has such a presence. He just has charisma.
Yeah, even when he gets into the ring and he holds his hat and he takes it off in that same signature way, he's still doing that crap 30 years later, and it's still working.
Well, you just put yourself, in the shoes of a kid, and you just imagine being terrified. Just the look in his eyes, the dead look, the paleness, just the size of this guy, the fact that he's in all black. It really is like something out of a nightmare.
Yeah, this is an incredible debut. And the way that they led up to it was perfect too, by having him be like the mystery opponent. Nobody knew who was going to come out and help the $1 Million Man. And then the whole match, the announcers are complaining, like, of course they can't beat him. They had no time to prepare for somebody like this, as the Undertaker's just beating the hell out of everybody.
And this is a little thing, but I love the way they shoot him from way down low with the camera looking up at him, because he just looks enormous.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, so here he's just billed as The Undertaker. He had made his debut a few days earlier at a TV tape-in where they shot some squash matches, and he was billed as Kane the Undertaker. But already by this point, I think they had decided that they didn't like the Kane part of that, and they were just going with The Undertaker.
And thank God they did, because not only will that eventually lead to a pretty good name for another character later on down the road, but he never would have gotten over as Kane the Undertaker. That's just
too much of a mouthful. It would either be got to either be Kane or he's got to be the Undertaker.
Exactly. And yeah, everything about this goes well. This isn't exactly like the great wrestling Undertaker that some people associate with him as being. Like he's okay here. He's obviously very athletic, but man, he just murders Koko Beware in this match.
Well, that's perfect. He doesn't sell a single thing. He starts off against Koko Beware. Well, actually, he starts off against Bret, and he dominates Bret. And then Neidhart tags in. He kicks Neidhart's ass, too. Then Koko Beware comes in and gets tombstoned in like 30 seconds, and he's gone. And
there was actually like real heat between Koko and Undertaker, because Taker drops him on his head.
Yeah. He would get better at that move as time went on. I like that Gorilla here calls it a tombstone. Like he just knows that it's called that, even though they've never seen this guy before. And I don't think that move was ever called that before. I don't think he invented the tombstone, but I don't think it was called that before.
No, it was just called like an inverted pile driver before. Like other people had done it, and actually the sit out variant was, I think, maybe the first one that was invented. But like, yeah, like clearly it wasn't called the tombstone just for him.
Yeah. But after that, Taker tags out. We kind of settle into a more normal match. Neidhart eliminates Honky Tonk Man with a power slam. And then a minute later, this was a really bad elimination, but Neidhart hits the ropes. Virgil trips him, and DiBiase just covers him and pins him. Like, it's Survivor Series, and guys just get pinned by anything, apparently. I don't know if that was supposed... I think Virgil may have held his feet down during the pin at least, so there's something, but that was not a well-constructed elimination.
I mean, it was Virgil. Like, it's weird how legendary a name Virgil became, despite the fact that, boy, was he just bad.
Well, I mean, he's mostly remembered for ironic purposes, like the shots of him kind of sitting alone at fan conventions and nobody wanted his autograph. Although his Twitter account is amazing.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely is. And so is the Virgil bag. Shout out to the Virgil bag on Deadspin.
So Dusty and Undertaker go at it, and Taker eliminates Dusty with a double axe handle, which, you know, again, hell of a debut for the guy. He takes out a legend and one of the top baby faces in the company. So it's Brett 1-on-3 against DiBiase, Taker, and Valentine. But Undertaker goes after Dusty on the floor because Dusty was going after Brother Love, and Undertaker gets counted out. And Piper goes, "He's big, but he's dumb." Good work, Roddy.
Oh, boy. But, I mean, that's really the only way to get him out of here without him winning the whole thing.
Or have him get disqualified for choking somebody. But, yeah, you don't want to put him in the finale match, which today it feels like if they were going to debut somebody like this, they'd probably have him make the finale match, and then they would have him get beat by Warrior or Hogan. And I like doing it this way. You know, let's hold off on him fighting top guys until a little further down the line.
Yeah, and then the match keeps going on afterwards. So he maintains his mystique and kind of wanders off, and it's like nobody ever really got any decent shots on him ever. So, yeah, he looks amazing as he leaves.
Yeah, so Brett pins Valentine after countering the figure 4 into a small package, and then we get a really good exchange between Brett and DiBiase. Just two really athletic, smooth guys going at it. You know, this is still the era where a sunset flip is a high spot, so seeing guys do kind of a modern mat wrestling exchange is really a treat. But yeah, they go at it for a few minutes, lots of pin attempts. Brett keeps almost pinning DiBiase, but then DiBiase rolls through a crossbody and manages to pin Brett. You know, by this point, I think they clearly know they've got something in Brett and that they're going to be pushing him as a single before much longer. So good that he gets a little feature here.
Yeah, the interesting thing, well, there are two interesting things. The first is that after he gets pinned, Brett sits up, looks right into the camera, and says, "Fuck!" Which is pretty good. And the second is, like, if you tune into any match between, like, 1989 and, like, 1991, whenever he actually wins the world title, and you watch Bret Hart in a match, like, you would immediately think, oh, wow, they're pushing this guy to the moon. Like, he's got it. It took them so long to finally get around to, like, going with him. Like, he's clearly, like, if you look in retrospect, he's clearly the guy who needs to follow Hogan. Like, he's clearly the guy who's getting those reactions, and he's different, and he's an amazing babyface. Like, it's so clear, and yet, to them, then, obviously it wasn't.
Yeah, and, I mean, I think there's the two things jump out at me. One is, for the time, he was a smaller guy. You know, today he'd be as big as anybody else on the roster, but a guy who was, 6'1" and 220 pounds was a pretty small guy at the time. And also his promos, were really not very good. And he only really came into his own as a talker in 97 as a heel, I thought. But yeah, compared to a Hogan or, Warriors promos weren't necessarily the greatest, but at least they were very energetic and, had a lot of energy behind them. Whereas Bret is just very kind of monotone and serious and, not a real, out there talker.
Right. I think that's actually kind of an interesting topic for discussion because, like, Brett isn't a good star for the kind of wrestling, like, for the kind of shows that they were putting on during the Hogan era, which were like 90% promos and an occasional match that sucks.
Yeah, I always thought Bret Hart
but
would have been a great NWA champion.
Exactly. Like, he's the perfect star for a different era that they would have had to change in order to make. And eventually they do that, though they don't have any idea how to, and they wind up shitting their own company down the drain doing it. But it's like one of those things where, like, a wrestling promotion on top won't see that it needs to change until it's too late. Yeah. Bret Hart was the star that they needed to adapt to, and instead they tried to make him adapt to what they were doing, and then it was too late.
No, and they never wanted it to be him. They wanted it to be Luger. They wanted it to be Diesel. They just kind of kept settling with him.
Right.
You know, they'd try to push somebody they wouldn't get over and be like, well, we've still got Bret. Let's put the title back on him.
Yeah, he'll always be kind of a what could have been if he had really gotten that strong rub from Hogan, or if he had really gotten put over strong at any point before like 1995.
Well, that really is, I think, a big part of the problem is for that era, he never got to beat the top guys.
I think Piper's the only one he beat.
Flair and he got to beat Piper, but doesn't get to beat Warrior and doesn't get to beat Hogan. And, you know, honestly, neither of those guys ever would have put him over because...
Right. Well, he didn't even get to beat Savage.
No, which is crazy because they still had Savage under contract for the next couple of years, and they just never put him in a feud together, even though that would have been an awesome match.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So DiBiase's the sole survivor. Really liked that match. That was probably the best of the night for me.
My favorite's actually the next one, so we'll get to it.
Okay, so next match, we've got the Visionaries, Rick the Model Martel, Paul Roma and Hercules, who are Power and Glory, and the Warlord against the Vipers, Jake the Snake Roberts, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and the Rockers. So they go to interview the Vipers, who are in the shower because that's a nice, wet, moist environment, and that's more comfortable for Damien.
Though I love when the camera pans over to Sean and Marty, who have their like super feathered, permed out hair, and like that's not a good environment for them.
No, and Roberts has already been sprayed in the face with Martel's perfume, so he's got one bad eye he can't see out of. This feud between Jake and Martel would culminate in the infamous blindfold match at WrestleMania 7, so they're already building towards that one here.
Now, did he have a contact lens in or something like that? Because he's got like a milky white eye.
His eye is like all white. Yeah, he must have had a clouded contact lens.
It's a cool visual, it is.
Yeah, definitely. So this match gets going, and we start off with just each member of the babyface team getting to tag in and getting to kind of show their stuff off. And then Jannetty tags in against Warlord, and he kind of gets squashed and power slammed. Jannetty comes off the top rope for a crossbody, gets caught with the slam and pinned. Then a couple minutes later, Snuka hits Martel with a crossbody, but Martel rolls through and pins Snuka. I'm always interested in this run for Snuka because I feel like they brought him back with the hope that he was going to be a top guy like he had been in the early 80s, and just didn't pan out. Turned out he just didn't have the same spark he did back then.
Well, maybe that had something to do with the fact that he was on more steroids than I've ever seen a human being be on.
Yeah.
Like but, every inch of his body is like...
He looked like that in the early 80s too, and he could still move back then. But I guess by this point he'd gotten a lot older.
So that's my point. He's like 40 now, and he still looks like that. I mean, he looks like he's made out of bricks, and like he's walking like he has bricks under his skin, and he just can't get any movement.
Yeah, so he's around for a couple more months, and then puts over Undertaker at WrestleMania, and that's pretty much the end of him in the WWF. Although I think he comes back in '93 again, but that kind of comeback goes even worse than this one.
Hey, don't forget, he and Piper will eventually... Oh, no, I guess Piper and Flair won the tag titles, I thought. But he will eventually still be wrestling matches in like 2007.
Him, Piper, and Steamboat have that match against Jericho at WrestleMania 25.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Jake tags in. He can't see, so he ends up getting worked over until he manages to make a hot tag to Michaels. Michaels gets in and ends up getting cut off, and he gets worked over, and then he gets pinned by Hercules and Roma's superplex splash combo, which I thought was a really cool finisher.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then, so it's down to Jake against all four guys. He manages to DDT Warlord, but the referee is distracted, at which point Jake says, fuck it, and brings out Damien. He chases Martel back out of the arena and gets counted out. Martel wasn't the legal man, so Martel isn't counted out. All four members of the Visionaries survive.
I mean, this was my favorite match on the show, which is weird because so many of the people in this match are people who we generally consider to be just huge piles of human feces. But I was really impressed. I was impressed by Roma in this match. I could see why they thought he was going to be a star later on. Like, he moves really well. He's got something interesting to him.
Really good-looking guy.
Oh, yeah. I was way impressed by the Warlord, considering I had never seen a Warlord match before that I'm aware of. It's just one of those things that I just never bothered to actually watch. Like, Warlord is something that we've all heard of, plenty of. I was really impressed by him here. Like, he sells in this kind of cartoonish fashion. Like, everything's like, whoa. I love that from a big guy. I love every move that he did look crisp. He looks like $1 million.
Isn't that kind of shocking that he never really got a big push?
It's so shocking. Like, they're handing out pushes like they're candy to anybody over 6'6". How the hell
happened?
is this guy?
Did he get fired because of a failed steroid test, would be my guess.
I mean, it's very possible that just because of the steroid trial, like, guys like him just didn't get shots anymore. But even so, he was around during the late 80s. He could have gotten a shot at any point.
Yeah. I don't really have an explanation for kind of why they didn't see more potential in him. He just seems tailor-made for a run against Hogan or Warrior. That was
absolutely
Hogan always.
I mean, he probably couldn't talk.
Huge guys. Oh no, but
he probably couldn't talk. Yeah,
give him a manager. Everybody has a manager at this point. I think Slick was managing him.
Agreed. But the part of the match that's Michaels and Jake versus the other four, that's a great part of this match. Not only are Jake and Michaels like brilliant at selling, but they really, it's hard to describe how amazing Jake Roberts is at psychology and like getting over what he wants to get over. Every move he does in this match looks like garbage. Like he sucks. But like by the time that he hits that DDT, you're at such a fever pitch for him to hit it. Like everything is just so calculated. He sells the one eye thing so brilliantly so that like he's literally like casting out trying to get his hands on somebody so that he can know where they are, so he's not constantly being blindsided by people. Like it's a whole other level of knowing what you're doing in a match and getting it across coherently. Like it's a joy to watch him work.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the single best in-ring psychology of any wrestler in history, Jake Roberts.
Yeah, and just including Michaels with him, who does the athletic stuff that Jake never could. Like, that's a great two-man team. It's
fun that you can tell they already know that they want to push Shawn and they want to push Brett based on how those last two matches went.
Oh, yeah.
So now we go back to Sean Mooney interviewing the Hulkamaniacs, which is Hogan, Jim Duggan, Tugboat, and the Big Boss Man. Hogan says that once they're done with the natural disasters, they're going to go run wild on Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis.
He actually, like, part of the promo was like, George Bush, we volunteer to go over to Iraq once this match is over. And I kind of wanted, like, Tugboat or somebody to be like, what?
Not cool. Yeah, I don't know about that. Have you ever heard that they were going to have Tugboat be the Iraqi sympathizer before they got Slaughter to come in?
It actually makes a lot of sense storyline-wise, because the way that it was set up was that Hulk goes down, like he gets hurt, and then Tugboat's like the Hulkamaniac friend who's giving out like the hotline information so you can go and check on the Hulkster. Like they bill him as Hulk's friend kind of out of nowhere in a way that they never did with anybody else until Beefcake later on. Like it's clear that they're building up to probably a betrayal of some kind. I'm not surprised that they didn't feel like Tugboat was a big enough name, and the fans don't really give a shit about him here, despite him being Hulk's best friend.
Yeah,
It's too quick a build-up to turn him, but
probably would have gone even worse than Slaughter. At least Slaughter had, promo ability.
Right. I mean, the actual angle of Slaughter Hogan wasn't bad. It was the timing. And it was how horribly that they pressed on an issue that didn't want to be pressed on.
I don't know. But I don't think Slaughter at this point was a credible threat to Hogan. Having been gone for so long and having left the WWF before the boom really started, I think so much of their fan base wouldn't have been that familiar with him and would have just thought he was an old fat bald man wrestling in a t-shirt.
Probably. I mean, they might as well have just brought back the Sheik and made them do that.
Well, they did.
Yeah, that's true. They did.
Yeah, and somehow he was Iraqi now because those eye countries in the Middle East are all the same. Yeah. So this match, it's the Hulkamaniacs against the Natural Disasters, Earthquake, Dino Bravo, Haku, and the Barbarian. So just kind of a smorgasbord of classic Hogan gigantic opponents there.
Just imagine if Rick Rude had been in this match, how much better a match it would have been. Because this match desperately needed somebody to take bumps. Yeah. And it had no one.
No, none of those four guys. You probably could have started the bump counter, and I don't think it would have gone above 10 for the entire match.
Everybody just looks bad in it.
Yeah, it's kind of sluggish match. It's, Boss Man could move, but that's kind of about it. Haku could too. Boss Man eliminates Haku 3 minutes into the match with the Boss Man slam. So there goes the most athletic guy from the heel team. Duggan gets mad after Jimmy Hart pulls the rope down on him. He gets his 2x4 and beats the shit out of Earthquake with it. So that's a disqualification. Hogan and Earthquake get into it. Hogan manages to slam Earthquake, but then gets cut off doing a 10 punch and gets worked over. Dino Bravo tags in and gets cradled by Hogan and pinned, so Bravo's out. And then Hogan manages to tag in Boss Man. Boss Man comes off the top rope and Earthquake catches him, which is kind of unbelievable strength because Big Boss Man was a lot heavier at this point than he was in his later years. Big elbow drop from Earthquake and Boss Man's gone. So we're down to Hogan against Earthquake and Barbarian. Hogan tries to slam Earthquake and Piper calls him an idiot, and he's right. Can't get him up this time. We're too far into the match. Earthquake and Tugboat get into it, but they both fight to the floor and get counted out. I thought this was interesting because Hogan also beat Earthquake by count out at SummerSlam, so I don't think he ever pinned him on TV.
No, I don't think he ever did. I think they were always kind of vaguely building to him doing that. And that's super weird because, considering that they had the whole angle be that Earthquake put Hogan out with injury, Hogan never really gets revenge on Earthquake.
No, I think they were probably just always feeling like they could come back to that down the line, but it never happened.
Yeah, that was probably originally the plan to be for WrestleMania. And God knows, at least we were spared that.
Yeah, don't feel like that would have sold out the LA Coliseum either.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I feel like they would have had some mysterious security issues for that match too. So we're down to Hogan versus Barbarian, and this kind of goes the way you would think it would. Barbarian beats up Hogan for a couple minutes. Hogan hulks up, leg drop, 1, 2, 3. Hogan survives. He roughs up Heenan, and then he poses for about 5 minutes. Kind of par for the course for a Hogan match.
Yep, pretty much. There's not even really anything to say about it. I actively hated this match. I had to leave and come back to this show because I was like, Hogan. I can't even imagine being a jaded wrestling fan then trying to put up with Hogan. Because, oh my God, if you think Roman Reigns is annoying to watch, holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the exact same act for 6 years now, and he's lost like one match in that entire time.
Yeah, and it's just like, oh look, Hogan's getting beaten up. I can come back in 6 minutes and he'll be ready for the comeback.
Yeah, no. As always, Hogan must pose. So next up, we've got Gene Okerlund interviewing the Macho King Randy Savage. Too bad Savage didn't have a match on this show, but I understand them wanting to protect him and not have him get beat. Savage just wants a shot at Warrior and says Warrior's been ducking him. So start of Savage getting back into the main event after he'd kind of dropped out of it all year.
Though it's funny because he drops right here in this promo, like, I'm willing to retire if it gets me where I need to go. Like, all right, well, I guess you're working a retirement angle then because you just came out of nowhere and asked for this.
Yeah. So they already, I mean, yeah, they've already figured out where they're going for WrestleMania at this point. They know they're doing Hogan Slaughter for the belt and Savage Warrior in a retirement match. Speaking of Slaughter, he is here in our next match. We've got the Alliance, Tito Santana, Nikolai Volkov, and the Bushwhackers against the Mercenaries, Sergeant Slaughter, Boris Zukov, and the Orient Express. So, if you had to guess, who's the pro-American team here?
Which
one has more Americans on it?
That's a really great question. I don't know what the hell kind of alliance Australia, Mexico, and Russia is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Just like I don't really know. I know exactly what kind of alliance Iraq, Russia, and Japan is supposed to be. But yeah, like there's not an American person here.
Well, yeah, not.
I mean, I don't actually know where Tito is from, so I'm probably just being...
I think he's from Mexico, but yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, the Alliance guys, none of them are American, but they come out to the Stars and Stripes forever.
How hard would it be to have put like Duggan on this team instead of like Volkov? Like, how hard would that have been?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, this would make a lot more sense with Duggan leading the American team. And Duggan always got beat up by the anti-American heels to set him up for Hogan.
Yeah, it's his whole deal. He was like Bobo Hogan. That's his whole gimmick.
Yeah. So just again, for the mercenary team, obviously Slaughter is American, but Boris Zukov is American. He's actually from Virginia, although he plays a Russian. And Tanaka is Hawaiian. The only non-American on the Mercenaries is Sato, who's actually Japanese.
Yep.
Slaughter cuts a really long heel promo in the aisle, and I was really not very impressed with it.
It was rotten. Like, I can't... He's cutting 80s promos, like early 80s promos. And I kind of get what he's trying to get across, but like, I don't know if it's just my jaded attention span, but I did not have time for this.
I zoned out. And the live crowd can't hear it, so there's no heat on the promo, and I really didn't feel like there was a lot of heat on him here.
No, and I don't know when officially he came back. Was it close to this?
He'd been back for at least a couple weeks before this. I think he came back in the fall because he wasn't around for SummerSlam.
I feel like this is one of those times where they bring somebody back who needs to have nuclear heat and he doesn't have it. So part of the problem with the angle is they just keep escalating it, trying to get him heat. They bring in people from Iraq. They bring the Sheik back. They try to burn the flag. They go everywhere trying to get him heat, and none of it sticks to him. And like, that's you can't do anything. I was under the
impression that he got a ton of heat from this because I've seen his promo clips where the crowd is like the boos are deafening, but that's on Superstars, so it's taped. So I don't know if that's a post-production insert.
Got me. Like, it doesn't, at least here, and we're several months out too, so they haven't really started the heat in earnest. But yeah, it's not working yet.
No, it's definitely not feeling like the WrestleMania main event here.
But just feed the bushwhackers to him. That'll get it done.
Yeah, this match, not good. Tito pins Zukov with a flying forearm in less than a minute. Butch eliminates Sato with the battering ram headbutt a minute later. Tito eliminates Tanaka with a flying forearm after another minute. Sarge really did a great job picking his mercenary team here. So it's 1-on-4, Slaughter against everybody, and he proceeds to take out everybody. Slaughter pins Volkov with an elbow drop. He pins Luke with a gut buster. He pins Butch with a clothesline. I thought he looked terrible in the ring here.
He did. And his style, he's working that early 80s, plotting, only got to do like tiny, like little crappy moves. Like he has not adapted at all to the new generation of wrestling. Yeah, he looks like garbage and his moves look like garbage and it's boring.
Yeah, no, none of this is like, if you're going to beat guys with an elbow drop and a clothesline, you've got to be laying that stuff in. And it's just, yeah, it looks like an old man playing wrestling here.
And here's the thing, like Slaughter was a great heel at one point in his career. Unbelievable, on fire as a heel. He needed blood, though. Like he was one of those blood and guts kind of heels. Like that was the whole point. To put him in this spot where he can't do any of that stuff that he's used to, and he has to just wrestle straight up matches, which he was never particularly good at, it's just not doing him any favors. And he's old, and he hasn't really been wrestling, so he's rusty. It's the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, so this is the first time somebody had ever gotten 3 eliminations in one match, so they're trying to push him, but the 3 guys he beat were so weak that I don't think it really meant anything.
Yeah, and he almost loses to yet another flying forearm because that's
Man,
the
Tito was on fire with that.
That flying forearm is the most over move on this entire show.
That's a high spot at this point. Yeah, so Tito hits him with the flying forearm. General Adnan comes in and saves him with the Iraqi flag. Slaughter puts Tito in the camel clutch, and the referee calls for the bell. They tease that Tito tapped out, but Finkel goes, "Sergeant Slaughter has been disqualified." And the crowd does pop big for that. That was funny.
And I mean, good for Tito, and who is going to make it to the next level because somebody's got to do the selling.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tito advances to the grand finale match, along with Hogan and Warrior against DiBiase and the Visionaries. So it's almost main event time, but first we need to find out what's in the egg.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, they really oversold this. Like, they've spent at least weeks and possibly even months building to this. Like, the fans think this is a big thing. And it's logical because, again, they've been building to this for a long time, and it's getting to be WrestleMania season, so it feels like this is where you might have something big show up and happen, but instead it's Hector Guerrero in a chicken suit.
And, you know, like, I don't want to get like too philosophical on you here, but there's a sociological phenomenon that they've explored where, like, in terms of groupthink, where if an entire group of people all think the same thought in earnest, all at the same time in the same place, you'll feel pressure on yourself to feel the same way. Like, it's never been proven, and this is probably going to make me sound like a crackpot, but in any case, when you watch this, you can feel everyone in the arena going, what? They're not saying it, it's silent. But everyone is just thinking the same exact thought, which is, what the fuck? What the fuck?
Yeah, I just don't, I mean, I guess he was going to be their mascot, and I guess I can see how kids would like him, but if you're going to debut the mascot, just have him show up on Superstars. Like, I don't know why they thought they should build to this and make it seem like it was going to be a huge deal. Like, this would have just been dumb if they just had a dancing man in a chicken suit for a mascot, but it wouldn't have been all-time infamous if they hadn't built it up as something big.
Yeah, my favorite thing was on one of those weird like WWE.com shows where they put all the old legends together, is the revelation Dusty made that every time he and Vince saw each other, they would always be like, hey, what was worse, Shockmaster or the Gobbledygooker? And they both were like, swore up and down that the other person's idea was worse.
Which one is worse? I mean, the Shockmaster was going to be a main event wrestler, so I feel like that's probably worse.
I think the Shockmaster, they were spared further future embarrassment with the Shockmaster because that would have failed in any case.
Yeah.
And it's more of a funny moment where like you look back on it and you enjoy how shitty it is. This is less redeeming because it's just an empty segment.
Nothing good came from this.
No, I mean, Hector
Except
Guerrero doesn't manage to get anything out. So Gene Okerlund is desperately cutting both sides of a promo.
Gene sells the hell out of this.
Oh, he tries so hard. And he's clear, like, when you, like, hearing that there was supposed to be so much more go on with the segment that did, like, Hector was supposed to actually say stuff, and, like, there was supposed to be, like, some back and forth or something like that. You got to admire Gene for being so, like, light on his feet that he just, like, goes with it and tries to sell it with all his heart.
Yeah, I think this is something. I really wish there was someone like him in modern wrestling, because I miss having an interviewer who actually interviews the wrestler and kind of goes back and forth with them and, you know, can kind of guide them if they don't know what to do in their promos. Like, you see Gene rescue guys a lot of times. Like, they'll forget their line and Gene will find a way to prompt them on what they were supposed to say, or he'll know when to take over things, when he's supposed to push back. Like, today we basically just have good-looking people who say one thing and then hold the microphone to the guy's mouth. And I miss having somebody who has credibility and, you know, the freedom to actually, you know, be a character on the show like Gene Okerlund was.
Yeah, back then it was an option to just be an interviewer, whereas now if you show any sort of talent in that area for a week, they throw you into play-by-play training because they're so desperate.
Yeah, well, they tried Gene on commentary and he sucked at it, so they learned a lesson on that.
It's not where he belongs.
No. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody knows this is a disaster. Was like the founding article on WrestleCrap.com. I think it's the gobbledygooker is pretty much synonymous with terrible wrestling.
And let's just take a moment. Like, we all know that this is a stupid segment that sucks. Let's just take a look at the gobbledygooker for a second, though. Like, I invite you at home to pull up an image of the gobbledygooker. What part of that was supposed to be a successful mascot for children? What part of the giant bug eyes and the floppy turkey neck and like the giant terrifying feet was supposed to enthrall children about professional wrestling? That I ask you. Nothing about this character says professional wrestling. Nothing about him says Survivor Series. He only vaguely even suggests Thanksgiving. Like, what the hell was this costume supposed to be?
I think they were going for the San Diego chicken, but it's a really creepy version of it.
It's so creepy. Its eyes are like way off in different directions. Like, it's crazy.
So yeah, the Gooker was around. I think they tried it for like one TV taping and then pulled the plug on it.
Poor Hector Guerrero, too. Like, I wonder if he really thought this is going to be like his meal ticket.
Yeah, I mean, you could imagine this taking off and him having a job for 10 years, but no, didn't work out that way.
And here's a lesson for you out there, any independent wrestlers who might be listening to this. Don't sign up to be something that they could replace you as with nobody noticing.
Yeah. Was it a rib on the Guerrero family when they had Chavo Guerrero be Jack Swagger's Soaring Eagle? Was that a reference to this?
I think it had to be, right? I assume maybe Chavo was actually in on it, and maybe that was the joke. But, I mean, somebody backstage had to have been having a chuckle over that one.
Do you remember when they were pushing that Adam Rose's bunny was going to become a wrestler, was going to, like, they were going to reveal it was Justin Gabriel or something?
Yeah, it was like doing moves and everything, like won a couple matches.
They pushed that for weeks and weeks, and then they just dropped it.
I think they just dropped Justin Gabriel around that time too, didn't they?
Yeah, that's probably what happened.
Which, I mean, like, that would not have been an amazing reveal. Like, oh, hey, it's
guy we don't
Justin
care
Gabriel.
about. Yeah. All right, main event time. This show wasn't that long, but it really felt long.
Yeah, it really did. Like I said, like, it felt like the main event already happened, and now we're just seeing like a whole extra hour tacked onto the show.
Yeah, I mean, this match is like 10 minutes long, but we're kind of deep into the show at this point, especially after everybody's had a real big Thanksgiving meal and they're, you know, kind of tired and just trying to get to the end here. It's the grand finale match. Ted DiBiase, Rick Martel, Hercules, Paul Roma, and the Warlord versus Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, and Tito Santana. Naturally, 30 seconds in, Tito pins the Warlord with that fucking flying forearm.
The most devastating move in sports and entertainment.
Apparently, he's got the Lex Luger bionic forearm because nobody can kick out of this thing. DiBiase gets in the ring. He pins Tito with a hot shot. Hogan gets worked over, and Hercules and Roma hit him with the superplex splash combo, but Hogan hulks up, hits Roma with the Axe Bomber Lariat, which rare time him using that in America, and pins Roma.
Let me ask you a question. Is in the history of professional wrestling, has there ever been a move that sounded cooler but was less cool to actually watch than the Axe Bomber Lariat?
Probably not. Yeah, I remember as a kid when I would hear about Hogan's a totally different wrestler in Japan. He finishes people with the Axe Bomber, and I assumed it was like some kind of power bomb or something.
Right. Nope. He hits him barely. He taps him with his wrist.
Yeah. So Martel tags in, and he gets beat up by both Hogan and Warrior until he walks out on the match. So we're down to Hogan and Warrior against Hercules and DiBiase. Big boot and leg drop finished DiBiase, and then Warrior hits Hercules with a flying shoulder tackle, and the Warrior splash, and Hogan and Warrior survive. And then they beat up Slick because they're good guys.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you think it puts over Warrior more for him and Hogan to have their arms raised together at the end of this, or for Warrior to be the sole survivor?
It probably would have put over Warrior more if he was the sole survivor, but, Hogan kept finding ways to steal Warrior's limelight.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost see how they would have done it this way on purpose because they thought that Rogan continuing to give Warrior a rub would help him. But at the end of the day, he just keeps looking lesser. The more Warrior stands next to Hogan, you can even just see it when you watch it. He's not Hogan.
No.
He's not, the fans don't love him as much as they love Hogan. Hogan's a better performer. It's just clear.
So at WrestleMania, Hogan stole Warrior's moment because he got back in the ring and handed him the belt and raised his arm. And the story was, Hogan is such a great champion and sportsman. He did the honorable thing. And then for SummerSlam, he gets the big sympathetic storyline where Earthquake takes him out and he makes his big comeback. And also he gets to work with Earthquake, who was the really hot monster heel, while Warrior works with Rude. And Rick Rude is a great wrestler, but Warrior had already beaten him. I don't feel like Rude was really a top-level challenger at that point.
Right.
And, now here, Warrior has to be Hogan's buddy, and, they get to pose together while Hogan's music plays.
Well, it's so curious to me during this time, too, because most people probably wouldn't even be able to tell you who Warrior feuded with during this entire year. And this is the most important year of his entire career. And yet there's an ad during the course of this show, if you watch the WWE Network, for the main event, where he faces Ted DiBiase in a throwaway match for the title. Why wasn't that the match?
Yeah, it really is notable that they do the main event is the night after this, the main event being Saturday night's main event, but live on a Friday. And I just think that's kind of curious timing that they did it the night after the show, but maybe it was just the idea was that they could promote the replay.
I guess. There were still people around who could have worked with Warrior and done interesting stuff with him. And if they had really gone with Warrior, maybe that would have been something. But if you look back at how they actually did it, it was never going to work. They doomed it from the start.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't all in on it. And I think for the guy who came after Hogan, you needed to fully commit to it. But they were kind of half in, half out. And Hogan was making movies, but still around enough that, he still had a couple. Hogan was still their best option for another couple years at this point.
Right. Well, look at it on the bright side. There's an alternate universe where Randy Savage decides that he doesn't want to wrestle anymore, and the Warrior beats the Undertaker in Undertaker's first WrestleMania match.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been great.
No, it
No
wouldn't have been.
streak. Yeah. So my favorite part of this show, I think, was that during this celebration here, Monsoon on commentary yells, "Will you look at that?" Right as the camera zooms in on Hogan and Warrior's crotches.
And it looks like it honestly sounds like Monsoon is like very eager for you to be like, look, it's amazing. Their dicks look just alike.
The two finest packages in all the world today.
There you go. Some real American packages.
Look out, Saddam. They're coming for you now. Oh, so that is Survivor Series 1990. Some fun stuff on this show, but just kind of a filler, forgettable show for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I like the mid card. I like the first couple matches, and by the time Hogan came out, like I was ready to be done. Like the whole last half of the show was just dreary and slow, and you've seen it all before, and it just wasn't interesting, and it didn't go anywhere. Like the fans were into the top stars. It's also really notable at this point, like the low quality of the heels that the top faces have to work with. And I think that might be an underrated kind of part of all of this, that like there was no top heel, there was no Roddy Piper for Warrior to fight. There was really no heel on top that was just like the guy who's like charging up the crazy hot feuds for the baby faces. There's a lot of good heels, but no great ones.
I'd agree. I mean, I think about like Rick Rude was probably Warrior's top opponent, but I love Rick Rude. I think he was a great Intercontinental Champion, but he didn't really draw in a main event spot. And then Ted DiBiase by this point had kind of been around, and he'd lost enough big matches that I don't think the crowd really took him seriously as a guy who was going to win the world title. And I think the great heel they have is Jake Roberts, but they couldn't get the crowd to boo him at this point. He was too good.
And you can kind of see why around this time people are obsessed with the idea of Ric Flair coming in. I mean, he eventually will, and he'll kind of come in as a shell of his former self, and it won't really work. But just because he's that heel, like at least in theory, like he's the guy who's going to equalize it. He's the guy who can stand toe-to-toe with Hogan and Warrior and Jake and Savage and everybody. And it doesn't work, and then they have nothing.
Well, it doesn't work out this way, but doesn't it feel it does sort of work out this way, but it definitely feels like Undertaker is being brought in as that next great heel.
Right. Though they don't wind up going with him for a number of years, honestly.
Well, he beats Hogan for the title at the next Survivor Series, but then he loses it back to him like 3 days later.
Right. Like
he has a run against Warrior, but it's only on house shows. They never really touch on TV.
Yeah, somehow Papa Shango gets that run with Warrior.
Yeah, by the time they did that, Taker had already turned face.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Warrior quit in, kind of screwed up their plans, and they were going to make Sid the top face, but he apparently didn't want to do it. Thought that there was more money in being a heel.
Yeah, and I mean, you can kind of see how the whole story of the early to mid '90s failure is them just desperately seeking it. Like revisionist history, like the thing that everybody says is that they were seeking that top baby face, but honestly, what they were seeking was that top heel. They had a number of potential top baby faces, and just didn't have anybody to work with, or they'd get a guy like Yokozuna, and then WWE would fritter it away, and they would have nobody else after that.
Yeah, actually, I think that's an interesting way to look at it, because I mean, I do look at it and see a bunch of top faces who fell through, felt like they wanted to make Sid the new Hogan, but he, wasn't up to it. Softball was more important than wrestling. And they wanted it to be Luger, but nobody bought him as the all-American good guy. And, maybe they looked at Crush, but, he wasn't the guy for that spot.
Right.
And they just couldn't, then eventually they finally go to Diesel and it doesn't work out. And I think at a certain point, it was more just that the product they were presenting was so dated that they they didn't have any idea what a babyface was in the 1990s until they get to Steve Austin.
I agree. It's actually, I read a wrestling historian one time who said that the fascinating difference between WWE and WCW was that WWE was obsessed with the idea of a top babyface. WCW was obsessed with the idea of a top heel. And so they both were always kind of lacking the opposite. And I think that that's a really interesting commentary on both of their histories. And maybe the fact that WWE won shows that you can survive with a top face and not a top heel.
Yeah, well, I think that was always to WWE's advantage, that the faces would win and like the people would get to go home happy at the end of the show. Whereas with Jim Crockett and then WCW, the heels won like 9 times out of 10. The NWO always won. Ric Flair always won. And at a certain point, like I think you just frustrate the fans too much. But maybe in the WWF, they kind of go too far in the opposite direction where the baby faces always win. And really the only time they had a heel long-term champion was Triple H in the early 2000s. Other than that, it's always been a babyface on top.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a difference in wrestling philosophy, and I guess you'd have to say the WWF's won out in the end, but it's very interesting because WCW had that guy during the 90s that WWE really wanted in Sting. But part of what made Sting was that he always had these great heels to work with. Like Flair put him over, put him on top. He had the Horsemen to work against. Then eventually along would come Vader, and then Flair again. And then he always had that heel. WWE never had that guy for Brett.
No, definitely not. And I don't know who it should have been. Probably Shawn Michaels, I guess. But Vince had a man crush on him, so he pushed him as a babyface instead.
Yep. Yes, he sure did.
Yeah. All right, so I think that pretty much does it for Survivor Series 1990. An interesting time in the company's period. Certainly not the best show, but I think a lot of good stories we found going through here. So next week, we're going to be going back in time just about 20 years to the day to take a look at the first ever ECW pay-per-view. It's ECW Barely Legal 1997, April 13th, 1997, the night the line was crossed. ECW makes their pay-per-view debut. What are you looking forward to talking about next week?
There is so much that I'm looking forward to talking about here. I can't wait to talk about Terry Funk and just sort of the entire idea of Terry Funk at this period in history. I can't wait. Honestly, I'm going to say it right now, just as a slight spoiler for the show. Sabu versus Taz is one of my favorite storylines in wrestling history. So you're going to hear me just go all over the place about how happy I love that match. But Rob Van Dam first becoming a big deal. Oh my God. Like the Japanese match, which was incredible and like nothing you'd ever seen before at the time.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good stuff on that pay-per-view. Taz versus Sabu, Van Dam versus Lance Storm, Terry Funk fighting for the world title nearly 20 years to the day after he lost the NWA World Heavyweight title at the age of 53. A really fun and interesting debut for ECW. We'll also talk about, I think, more broadly, kind of what ECW was and how it had come to be. And in my view, the tragedy of ECW was that by the time they actually got national exposure, they were a shell of what they had been.
Agreed. And it must be said, too, this is the only ECW show that I like. So if that gives you an idea of what my perception is going to be.
All right. So, yeah, that will do it. Looking forward to hearing from you again. What have we got on the blog this week?
On the blog this week, we already started with number 1 of the scouting reports, NXT. I swore to you guys that it would actually come out for like 3 consecutive podcasts, and it finally has started coming out. It's going to be 5 total parts, so it's pretty much all I'm working on right now. But for the next 2 weeks or so, you're going to have new editions every couple of days, so just keep checking back.
Good stuff. You can find that on the blog at KewshReviews.com. You can follow Kewsh on Twitter. What's the handle?
At Kewsh Reviews.
And you can follow me at the Lawcast. Thanks for listening, guys. Looking forward to hearing from you again.